echoes from the Watchtower again. Jonah Mercer came back because the sea would not stop saying his name. He told himself it was only the gulls and the old houses squatting along the cliff, but the pull was a different weight, deeper than nostalgia. The Watchtower waited, a stubborn silhouette against a bruised horizon, its stone weathered into the shape of a shoulder braced against wind. He had kept a notebook for years. It rode under his coat like a talisman. Standing on the path, he understood that returning was less a choice than an answering. As if the tower had left a breadcrumb trail, only he could smell. He remembered the duties cleanly enough. The hours on the stone spiral, the slow ritual of checking glass and wick, the logbook entries worded with a kind of careful boredom. Memory, however, was stubborn like dry salt. Between clear scraps of routine, there were holes that smelled like damp paper. Neighbors spoke in softened tones about the place, as if lowering their voices might keep it asleep. Jonah noticed small signs of neglect he had not expected. A latch left ajar, a smear of grit on the final step, and the distinct impression that the tower had been waiting in a long, patient emptiness. That first night, the sound came like a draft through a keyhole, a syllable, then another, stitched into a cadence he could not place. Jonah sat across from the unlit lamp and listened until the moments between breaths lengthened into their own weather. The tower answered with small disturbances, subtle and accusatory footfalls that fell a beat late, a curtain that moved though no window was open. Each sound seemed to come from a different memory, as if the structure gathered voices and sorted them like sea glass by color. He wrote the first phrase down, though his hand trembled and the ink trembled more. By the third night, the tower no longer sounded like an empty house. It sounded accusatory in a soft, patient way. Words began arriving threaded to familiar objects, a sentence stapled to the edge of a page, the echo of a name on the stairwell. Jonah discovered a line in his own handwriting he did not remember composing, dated a day he had been somewhere else. The words were careful, observational, rather than menacing, but their familiarity unnerved him. They described things he thought no one knew. The particular way his father whistled as he fixed a roof, a childhood nickname he had never spoken aloud. Sleep came thin and fractured. Jonah began to notice the tower watching him back, not with eyes, but with arrangement. The way a chair faced a window it had never sat near, the way dust lay in a pattern like a fingerprint. He traced a route up the spiral one night and felt a temperature change that was almost deliberate. Halfway up a step, he'd find a shoe print impression on a dustless patch, as if someone had rehearsed a tread and then been erased. Each anomaly suggested an audience that practiced absence, rehearsing how to be unseen until their presence felt inevitable. There was a reflection in the lantern glass that did not behave like glass. When Jonah peered closer, he expected only a warped city of himself, the stooped shoulders, the small notebook. Instead, the reflection hesitated on a different expression, a tilt of the head he did not remember. It replayed moments he had not thought were recorded. A childhood afternoon, the smell of tar from a pier, the exact way his sister laughed. It was not a mirror of what he was doing in the tower at that moment, but of what he had carried away from other times, neatly arranged like objects on a shelf, his memory kept private. A map appeared on a table he could have sworn had been cleared hours before. It was folded differently than any he recalled leaving it, inked with a root that ended in a small, unlabeled cross. Where the cross sat, there was a notch drawn in the paper, and the notch matched the scar on his own palm, a thin white crescent he believed only he knew about. The coincidence read like a sentence. Jonah pressed his thumb to the paper as if it might bleed answers, and the paper kept its silence, patient and dry as bone. He began to speak aloud, half to test the shape of the space, and half to summon whatever listened. He called out for the practical things who had closed the shutters, who moved the kettle and received practical replies. The kettle left cold, shutters latched the wrong way. Then, in a different register, the tower answered with one of his old family phrases, a private name only his aunt used during thunderstorms. Hearing it felt like a violation and like recognition at once. The tower had not only recorded sounds, it had learned which ones belonged to him. On the seventh night, he waited at the top step, as though for a patient performer. The glass in the lantern fogged, then cleared in a slow, deliberate breath. Instead of the sea, the glass showed other towers, brief glimpses of distant stones, and small figures peering out, places like voices echoing back at each other. The scene was not literal. It was more like a remembering of similar lonelinesses. Jonah understood with a clarity that smelled of salt that he was not the tower's only audience. It collected watchmen like ferns collect morning light, stacking awareness where there had been none. Tried to leave once the next morning and found the path different, as if the land itself had been rearranged overnight. The map in his pocket moved of its own accord to point inland, to a place the coastline did not map. He felt a particular tug in his sternum then, like a thread. Standing at the cliff edge, with the wind pressing against him, he realized the tower did not simply remember names and phrases. It retained small debts and returned them folded into sentences tailored to pull. The recognition was not cruel. It simply had its own logic. He left that day and walked until the houses blurred, and the map grew stubbornly useful. Yet on his pillow that night a single page he had not written before waited folded beneath his mattress. The handwriting was his. The sentence inside read, simply, "Goodbye, Jonah." It carried neither threat nor consolation, only a fact recorded like a tide mark. He held the paper to the window and watched the horizon, where the tower was a blind smudge. The hair along his neck waited, not for fear alone, but for a decision he had already, perhaps, made by answering once more.